Hello and welcome to a new video. Today it's going to be a little bit different. I'm not doing my usual sourdough bread experiments, although there is a little bit of sourdough in here as well. For the last couple of years, I have been really enjoying making and especially decorating gingerbread cookies for Christmas and Easter. And in this video, I'm sharing with you the Easter version. If you've watched any of my sourdough experiments, you know that I'm doing a lot of those to simplify the bread making process as much as possible. It's all about getting a nice bread with the least amount of effort. Well, with these cookies, I'm doing something very, very different. I'm definitely chasing that perfection. I want the prettiest, nicest cookies in the world, and I'm willing to do many steps to achieve that. And that's because they are very different for me. They are something special, something I only make twice a year, whereas the bread I'm making literally every single week. And so it makes sense that I actually really dive deep into this process and I try to give it my best. I feel like I am improving every time I make a new batch, but also I feel like every time I make a new mistake that I haven't made before, and then I have to try to figure out how to do it better next time. And I'm all about sharing those mistakes with you so that you can learn with me and also teach you all of the tips and tricks that I have already figured out and discovered along the way. So get a cup of coffee and join me for this video. When it comes to making the dough for these gingerbread cookies, there are a couple of things that I want to point out. First of all of the ingredients and the measurements you can find in the description of the video in case you would like to make these as well. Second, I want to talk about the color of the dough, which I feel like can really vary, and I think that my cookies tend to be on the lighter side, and what determines the color a lot is the honey that you use and the color of the honey. I believe in the United States it's more common to use molasses for gingerbread cookies rather than honey, and that's of course even darker than honey. And then I believe you can also add other things to it, such as cocoa powder, which of course would again darken the cookies a little bit further. I think mine are lighter because I am adding the sourdough starter into it, which makes the dough a little bit more sticky, and as a result I have to add a little bit more of that white all-purpose flour to make it not sticky, and that changes the color to a lighter one. And then of course it also depends on how much you bake them, but that's another part of the video. So that's the color of the dough. And then the other thing that I wanted to point out as well was the spice mix that I'm using here. Again, you can find the exact ingredients in the description of the video, and this kind of a spice mix is a very common one here in the Czech Republic. I actually have like that spice mixed already mixed up in a little bag, and so I just add that spice mix. But again, I think in other countries, when you make these types of cookies, you might be using very different spices, and that of course has a really big impact on the flavor of the cookies. And I just love these, so I definitely want to use that particular spice mix. And I also feel like, or actually one year I have done both cookies with the sourdough starter and without it, and I definitely liked more the ones with the sourdough starter, so that's why I used that as well, simply because I like the taste. Obviously you don't need the cookies to puff up much, or you're not using the starter to rise the dough or anything. It's really there for the flavor, at least for me it is. And so it's absolutely optional in this recipe. You can definitely skip that if you don't want to use sourdough or you don't have a starter. That's totally fine. And the last thing I want to mention is you want to work the dough really well to not have any air bubbles in it. You want to do that before you roll the dough out as well. So once you combine it at first, you want to put it in the fridge for at least 24 hours to have some time to kind of work, have the sourdough starter to do its job to make, that incredible taste. And then you can roll the dough out. But again, before doing that, you want to work it a little bit so that there are no bubbles. I actually left this dough in the fridge for about 3 days, and that's totally fine too. Like you can do 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 5 days. Like you can really time this so that it works with your schedule, which is of course always great. When I was ready to bake the cookies, I definitely also took very good care of preparing my baking trays with the parchment paper. You can see that I'm not doing the typical thing that I do whenever I'm using parchment paper, which is I just crinkle it up into a bowl and then lay it flat again. But I'm not doing that here because what that does, it creates a lot of wrinkles in the paper, which then wrinkle up the cookies. And since I want nice flat cookies, I don't want any wrinkles in the parchment paper. So what I'm doing is I'm being very, very careful to cut the parchment paper to the size of just the bottom of the tray, so that I'm trying to avoid any lifting of the parchment paper in the corners. I'm even cutting off the corner pieces or on any of the sides. And then I'm doing this trick where you put just a few drops of water either on the baking tray or on the bottom of the parchment paper, and that's how you kind of stick the corners of the paper to the baking tray. The entire goal of this whole thing is to try and make the parchment paper lay as flat as possible. And I think I did manage that pretty well this time, although as you will see later, I didn't take enough care kind of not rolling out the dough, but really working the dough, working the bubbles out of it, because there definitely were a couple of the cookies that did have some bubbles kind of forming up on the surface of the cookies. I took out my collection of cookie cutters. I'm always really happy when I'm going through the collection. I don't know why, but it also makes me very happy to collect more of these. And so I'm selecting the ones that are more Easter themed. I do have more that are Christmas themed, so I'm keeping those in the box, of course. And then I'm going ahead and rolling out the dough on a lightly floured surface. And what I'm trying to do is to not get any flour on the top part, on the surface of the dough. So I'm not flipping the dough at all. It always stays just one side down and the other one I'm rolling up. I'm trying to make sure that my rolling pin is lightly floured so that you don't have these streaks of flour from the rolling pin on transferring onto the cookies. Again, just to get a nicer look without any white flour streaks on the surface of these cookies. And I'm trying to put similarly sized cookies on the baking trays together. So I had, I think, 1 or 2 trays where I've placed the bigger egg and heart shapes. I think some of the the rabbit and the dove or whatever other cookies that were a little bit bigger, I've put those on their own tray, and then the smaller ones go together. This is so that the cookies bake at the same rate, and you can, because theoretically the bigger the cookie and potentially the thicker the dough, the longer you should bake them. And so that's why you wouldn't want to combine different sizes of cookies on the same tray. And I'm always surprised with how quickly these bake. I kept these in the oven for, I think this time it was about 7 minutes at 180 degrees Celsius. And so it's really fast and you really want to pay close attention to this. And ideally, or at least that's what I do, I first cut up everything. That's also why you saw me prepare like 4 different baking trays, so that I could have all of the cookies cut out and prepared on the trays, so that then I can just put them in the oven one by one, and I'm not trying to like, oh, and now I have to quickly cut more cookies. I just have it all ready and I can pay attention to the cookies that are in the oven. And as soon as I get them out of the oven, I brush them with an egg wash that I mixed with a little bit of water, just so that the egg wash is really nice and runny, like it doesn't create any streaks or anything like that. Again, trying to achieve like a nice glossy finish that's equal all throughout all of the cookies, or it's just equal on the surface of the cookies. And so you want to do that as soon as they come out of the oven, so that they're still hot, which, yes, that is a little bit challenging to do, and I always get my fingers just a little bit burnt, but it's worth it. It definitely creates a really nice glossy finish on the cookies. And that was it for day 2 of me working on these cookies. Once I had them all baked and all with that nice egg wash finish, I've put them to the side. And then I think maybe like the next day, or again like 2 days later, whenever I had the time for it, I started working on the decorating. And that really is the part that gets me. You may or may not know that I actually have another YouTube channel where I used to do macrame tutorials. It is no longer active, but I can still link it down below for you if you want to check that out. And so I definitely have this artistic side to my personality. I very much enjoy the macrame, and I enjoy all kinds of little crafts, and this, the decoration of cookies is definitely a craft that I'm very much into, and I want to get good at it. I really enjoy the process, but it definitely is challenging, and I wish I had somebody to learn this from, but there isn't anyone. I don't have any family, relatives, or friends that would know how to do this really well, and so I just try and learn from YouTube videos and Facebook groups and wherever to get some information on how to do this well. Anyways, rambling on a little bit. So to create my icing, what I do is I mix an egg white with powdered sugar, and then I add citric acid as well. You could also just squeeze some lemon juice into this, but you can get a little bit of the lemon, like the flesh of the lemon, which would then of course cause you issues when you're using your piping bag, because it could clog up the tip of your piping bag. So it's best to use something that is completely liquid. And then comes the hardest part, which is knowing the right consistency to mix all of this to. Basically, how much of the powdered sugar do you want to add versus how much of the liquidy parts, so either the citric acid or the egg white. And it's of course difficult because every egg is a different size, so you can't have any like precise measurements, and you just kind of have to learn and experience this enough, I guess, to just be able to tell what the right consistency is. Usually I'm always trying to lift the mixer and kind of see how much are the peaks still like folding into the rest of the icing versus how much are they staying on top of the surface of the icing and kind of drying out a little bit. And that's how I try to judge how ready it is. For the decorating, I'm using these plastic bags that have a tiny plastic tip. I know that a lot of people will use like literally just a plastic bag, like a, you know, without any kind of a tip at the end, and they will just snip off a little bit. But I find these pretty nice to work with, so I do enjoy them, and that's why I use them. So I fill it up a little bit with this initial consistency, let's say, which is what I use to create the contours on the cookies. And then it is on to the decorating. And of course, there are so many different styles of decorating. So far, I've only done this one where I just stick to white. I don't use any coloring in the cookies. I would like to do that in the future at some point, but I feel like there's just so much to learn with just the white, and you know, I can just practice with this and that's fine. But what I do really like is these lacy bits. That's what you will see me create on a few of these cookies, where you create this sort of a tiny grid and then you fill that out or up with little dots, creating some sort of a pattern in them. And I just find that really fun and relatively easy. Like, I find it so much easier to make a very straight line than to make a curved line with the icing. I don't know, maybe somebody else has the exact opposite challenge or the exact opposite issue, but for me, this is what works best. And so that's what I try to do a lot of, especially this year. And you will see later that I'm also experimenting with other types of shapes and other types of drawings on the cookies. When I had a couple of the cookies with the contours completely dry, I mixed a little bit more of the citric acid into the icing to make it a little bit more runny, and I use that for the flooding, as they call it. That's when you flood essentially the surface of the cookie with the icing. Now, I think that I'm pretty sure one of the mistakes I did with this year is that I was not using enough of the icing. And what that did is that it created quite an uneven surface. Like, if I added just a little bit more of the icing, I think it would like dry out, and it would just be a more of a consistent surface. I don't know how much you will be able to tell, but there is a clip later where I am showing a couple of the different cookies, and I think if you're looking at it properly, you will be able to spot a lot of them that have like all these peaks and bubbles into it, and sometimes the icing was a little bit too much see-through, and so I feel like this was not a great job on my part, let's say. As for the technique of applying this flood icing, I'm just using a little teaspoon, and then I'm not touching the surface of the cookie. I'm just kind of poking the spoon into the icing and then kind of making it move across the cookie this way, and then just using a toothpick to fill up all of the little corners and little places where I can't get to with the spoon. And I had these cookies dry out for another day or two before I started applying the top layer of decorating on the flooded surface of those cookies. And by the way, I just kept the icing in the fridge. I really paid attention to making sure that it doesn't dry out by placing a wet tea towel on top of that bowl. And it worked. Like, I've been using it for about 4 days, and I feel like I've been able to get some pretty good results out of using just that same batch of icing. I always mix it up with the spoon and see, you know, what is the consistency? Has it changed? Do I need to add a little bit more sugar or maybe a little bit more water? And I really tried to use it up because that was something that really bothered me last time, where I felt like I just had to make a new batch every time and it was drying out too much if I let it stay in the fridge for 1 or 2 days. And like, there is just no way that I'm able to decorate all of these cookies in 1 or 2 days. I really have to spread it out over a week or so. And so it's great when the icing can last. I was really trying to find a good angle to film all of this decorating for you, but it was quite difficult with my big belly being in the way. Not the most comfortable thing. And I feel like I always have to get my head like straight above the cookie and really close to it to see what I'm doing. And so there isn't that much room left for a camera to be in the way. But I hope that you can still enjoy some of these shots of me decorating the cookies. I'm definitely enjoying the process, even though I can't do this for too long in one sitting. But hey, that will be different next time. And that will be it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.